All right, we want to welcome everyone to Planning Commission tonight. We're going to go ahead and start with the pledge by Commissioner Warnick.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, thank you. We'll first start with our minutes from October 5th, 2022. Any questions about those? Any concerns? If not, let's entertain a motion.
I move we approve the minutes of last month.
Okay, we got a motion.
Second.
Second, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That passes. Conditional use permit 1150 East Verizon. I know that we have some talking points on that.
Yeah, I'm going to be really brief, particularly given that nobody's here. In short, the applicant has asked that we continue this. They're not sure whether the project will proceed or not. If it does, at this point, we probably would just simply notice for a new public hearing and take it from there. So
Okay.
That's where that's at.
Okay, we'll move on then. Then we'll move to Title 15 amendments. It's a public hearing. I don't know who's taking that.
You want a motion?
Okay.
To continue.
Okay, well, okay. So does someone want to make a motion to?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we continue the conditional use permit for the Verizon cell tower upgrade.
Okay, a motion?
Second.
And second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That continues.
Yes.
Yeah. We're just gonna continue it, so we'll do a public hearing when they bring it back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
given that the
one
crowd's
lone-
pretty light, I don't see people lined up for the public hearing. Do you care if we take the
Which one do you want to move to?
the
Seven?
new business item?
Yep.
Do you have anybody else comment or?
Yeah, I have one already.
Okay.
That's
so maybe
okay.
Maybe we actually hold off then? Is that okay? Okay.
Title 15 then.
You gotta wait till the end now.
We won't be more than 3 hours.
Especially if let Dave go.
I don't know what order, so. How about the easy one first, Mike, the annexation one?
Yeah, it's the first
Yeah,
one. And
the first one. Do you care if I just kind of speak to the main points of these in mass, and then we can have whatever discussion you want to have? Frankly, there's nothing terribly exciting with any of what we're proposing tonight. I will say this, I'll touch on some proposed changes to parking. That might be one where you want to take some more time to think things through and to deliberate. That has been a big issue, of course. You've talked about it many times, the council's talked about it many times. We've given it considerable thought as staff. You've seen what you'll see tonight in a earlier draft kind of a form. But anyway, that for me is the most significant set of proposed amendments to Title 15 that we'll talk about tonight. Incidentally, both with things like the construction standards and amendments to Title 15, particularly where they're being initiated by the city, we are trying to get to the point to where we do this annually or maybe twice a year, this time of the year, so as to have things maybe take effect around the 1st of January versus to just bring them to you multiple times throughout the year, multiple public hearings and that type of a thing. But may not always work that way. That being said, this one, first changes here. These are almost entirely proposed to simply bring our ordinance into conformity with our day-to-day practice. Really, that's what that's about. Some of the language that we have in our ordinance now has carried over for many, many years. Should have been changed previously, but simply wasn't. So I've said this about other changes that we made in the past that in part fits into the cleanup category that's certainly the case. The one exception, again, not terribly exciting, but F, where we're talking about addresses, it's tough for people to change their addresses when they are annexed into the city and they're part of the new grid and that type of a thing. We require it.
Mike, we go
Lots
to
of good reasons. We require that for lots of good reasons. But it's been suggested that we add language that allows our people that care the most, or public safety people, to have some discretion about whether or not a property owner should be forced to do that. That's really it for those changes there. Parking, that's what I have next. Do you want to go there? Some of this certainly fits as well into kind of the cleanup or restructuring type of a category. Maybe it does make sense to just kind of go through these page by page.
Anything change up here?
No.
Well, that's
Yep.
just a discussion.
We have changed just a couple of minor things about definitions, really just one. The language that's proposed to be struck through here has simply been moved to another part of the code. So as we scroll down, you'll see that that's proposed to be located elsewhere. We have a little bit more of that as well, to where we're moving language from certain zoning district descriptions down to a section that's dedicated to parking. It's the same for the first part that was struck through. And once again, same thing here, so just kind of reorganizing things. Likewise, reorganizing things. And then we get into some of the changes that do impact, excuse me, how much parking a developer would have to provide. So, a little bit of a different definition here, clarifying that. Saying that tandem parking is allowed. We'll come back to that in a minute. A little bit more definition as to counting parking that's not on a specific parcel that's included in a development, or it might be on an adjacent parcel that has been permitted in a few cases in the past. Simply specifying a little bit more clearly what would be needed in order for a project to qualify for that to come into play. Let's go down to the next ones, Mike. This is where we start to get into the reorganization part. So pulling the language from the different sections where it was eliminated, putting it into a couple of different boxes here on this existing chart that we have in the code, that is simply being, I'm going to say reorganized, like I've said several times. We'll go through the specifics of that because that's really what I think is the most significant about what's proposed now. This is a minor thing, but right now, not that I think we're going to see a hotel with a restaurant attached to it anytime soon, but this has been confusing for some folks in the past that we have different standards for restaurants. That was intended to be for if somebody has a hotel and they have a certain amount of square footage dedicated to a restaurant. They can see people who would have a lesser parking requirement than what we have for other things. I don't want to spend more time on that because I don't think it's an issue, but a cleanup that's worth doing. Let's go down to where we can actually read through the new text at the bottom, Mike. So, no change here to the rule. So right now, with single-family homes, we require that they have a garage that it can at least fit one car, a one-car garage for every single-family home that gets built in Spanish Fork. In master plan developments, we require that to be two. Hence, the space for one vehicle, except master plan development, two-car garage is required. And then we go on to describe that in addition to that, it's kind of interesting, for single-family homes, we require 2 spaces per home. Interesting that for other uses, we require more. We'll talk more about that. Again, this is referenced someplace else in the code about tandem parking. This is consistent with that phraseology. Tandem parking is allowed, but in some regards to date, we've given people credit for required parking, even if it's configured in a tandem manner. Tandem being, I'll use the I think most common kind of example. I have a garage and I have a driveway, and my driveway is big enough to park a car in it. But I can't get the car out of my garage if there's a car parked in the driveway. Literally, they are front to back. That would still be allowed, but that would only count towards one parking space. That's an important part of what's proposed tonight, and we think that's an important change to make, largely because we think only one of those two spaces really gets used. Either people aren't parking in the garage, or they're not parking in the driveway if they do park in the garage. So we think that's maybe the most significant thing that's led to our parking requirements, which frankly I think are fairly robust today, but still they don't seem to work very well. And I think it's because we've given people credit for that tandem kind of relationship.
Is there any language in there about the length of that driveway space? Because what you see in a lot of the townhome developments is that that driveway up to the garage is too short for the truck that's parking there, and they hang out over the sidewalk or into the approach.
We'll talk more about that in a minute, but we have not defined it in text
Okay.
with a depth. I will say this, that, at least I don't think we have, I'm almost certain we haven't. Might have to think that through. In order for, well, we do with language that we've struck out, now that I think about it. So maybe moving on from what I just described, which is the parking requirement for single-family homes, onto what I think has been our biggest challenge, townhomes specifically. Today, and we could go back to that section of the code, maybe master plan development section that we've struck through. I think we can still read well enough there to
Which one?
keep, it's the big chunk of red. I don't think you passed it here.
Oh, did I pass it?
I think this will make it easier to describe the change, so.
Is that one? Is this one?
There we go, yes. Okay, so in master plan developments, they need to provide at least 2.5 parking spaces per home. And for example, townhome developments that have been before you, those have all been presented as master plan developments. So 2.5 spaces per home, but if they provide a 2-car garage, that is not the right place to read from for what I'm going to try to describe. Garage and driveway space. Here we go. Where projects have, so maybe just starting right here, developments that include with each home, and this is the rule that typically has been applied to townhomes, a 2-car garage and driveway space for 2 vehicles. And we've defined that as being 20 feet deep. Shall not be required to provide additional guest parking. Whereas if, for example, you had a driveway that was shallower than 20 feet, they would just get credit for 2 of those spaces, and they'd have to provide another half a space someplace else. Which means, for example, that if you had a 200-unit townhome project where you meet that criteria, 20-foot deep driveway, 2-car garage, there would be no additional guest parking provided. But if the situation were a little bit different, shallower driveway, let's just say, for example, then there would be, with a 200-unit project, another 100 parking spaces provided someplace else, which is pretty consistent with what you see in some other communities around us. And that's kind of where we're starting to go with these changes, which is by not allowing those spaces either in front of or behind to count as 2 spaces where it's tandem, but rather that just counts as 1. Developers would still need to provide that additional space someplace else.
Right.
And there's another part to that that is proposed as well. So Mike, if you, I need to go through any of that in more detail. Sorry that I kind of stammered through it, but
No, well, except for, so the 12 feet by 20 feet on the strikeout part is part of a garage.
the definition of a garage space,
But
yeah.
We're talking more about driveway space.
We're kind of talking about both, but particularly to have this, to meet this criteria here, driveway space, we've just said as staff, if it's not 20 feet deep, it doesn't meet that criteria. And
So
that's,
we don't need it in the, we don't need it in the code.
it probably wouldn't hurt, but it's also maybe becoming less relevant, depending on how you want to handle this next section that let's go back to that, Mike, what we were talking about down on the chart for townhomes and the like. So this part right here. So today, we're proposing that, like with single-family dwellings, if there ever was a standard project proposed with these types of uses, they'd have to provide a garage for one vehicle. Practically speaking, given the way our ordinance is set up, that wouldn't happen. So these projects would have to provide a two-car garage for these different types of housing. And we're saying that instead of 2.5 spaces per unit, they'd actually be required to provide 3, which is a second part of raising the amount of parking that would be required. Not only would that configuration that we described earlier not qualify to completely satisfy the parking requirement without providing additional spaces someplace else, whether they be described as guest parking or anything else, we're proposing that it go from a half a space per home to a full space per home. Any questions about that? It's not an insignificant jump or change, and there probably are some things that would happen by way of unintended consequences from this. So for example, today, a developer is motivated to provide a 20-foot deep driveway. As this is written, they wouldn't necessarily be required to do that any longer. If you would like that to be required, this would be a good time to talk about that and maybe add some additional language. We do have some projects, because of how they're configured, and it might be helpful to look at some of these, where, for example, we have rows of units that share a driveway that leads to their garages. In that case, in my opinion, it doesn't make sense to have another 20 feet of space dedicated along those shared drives for driveways to the garages. So it might be worth thinking about, in some cases, is it important to have the additional driveway space, whereas maybe in some other cases it's not? Clearly, there are different approaches to a design that I think might merit some additional thought rather than just carte blanche, putting one rule in place for everything.
How many of those come to us as master plan developments and not just as, so,
Essentially, I can't think of any way today that someone would bring forth a project that wouldn't be a master
so
plan.
that would be
development.
part of the conversation almost
Certainly
every
could
time
be.
then?
Yep.
But like, that's Annie, what you described is like Annie's Acres.
Annie's Acres is a good example, or the townhome project that's next to Annie's Acres, if you've driven through that.
Yep.
The Anella Townhomes is a new one. About 2/3 of their units have the shared drive to garage kind of a concept. I don't want to go through this too quickly. I also don't want to bore you to death, but this is the biggest chunk of what we're proposing to change.
And it is a big deal to the developer. I
Oh,
mean,
it's a big deal for them,
It
yeah.
means a lot in how much space they have to provide for parking rather than for additional units.
But it's also us seeing what has not worked in the city. I mean, these changes are addressing sore spots that we've seen, we know about, we're dealing with, and it may be a burden, but for the well-being of the city, it needs to be addressed. We have-
And I think it ought to be clear, anytime that there's a shared driveway, I don't know how you're gonna provide 20 feet of extra space you know, in front of a garage.
Yeah,
Or
but
you may
the-
not
The one
want
down by Annie's Acres though, when I get in there,
Can't turn around.
when I was in my Jeep, which has a very tight turning radius,
Yeah.
and driving through there, I backed out because I
I
couldn't turn
agree.
around.
Yeah, I've been down in there with my pickup,
Yeah.
yeah, I know some people down there, so it is a little difficult.
Do we have any projects that would even fit this criteria at this point that we've approved? Because we're fighting tooth and nail for 2.5.
Actually, in most of them, and what really started this conversation almost a year ago, is the redevelopment of the Fritzie property, where the planning commission said, we know this is how much parking our ordinance requires, and we want this much. And city council said, well, if you want this much, then the code should say require that much.
Right.
And
I-
we've taken
I
this long to
agree.
get to that
Agrees.
point. So
I agree.
this seems like maybe a bigger change than what it would be practically in reality.
So my opinion on this is, isn't 2.5 the highest of anybody in our valley already?
It might be close, but again, that might be
Yeah.
high, but giving people full credit for a two-car garage and driveways, I think is
Oh,
more akin
right.
to like two.
Oh, right.
How maybe some other
That makes
cities would
sense.
regulate it.
I definitely think it's a good move to not count the tandem parking. But in addition to that, I honestly think that splitting the difference in either going 2.75 or 2.8 helps everybody a little bit better. Like asking for 3, and I'm the girl that wants lots of parking, but I don't know. I personally think 2.75 or 2.8 is better than 3. And I don't know how much that equals in dollars and cents to developers, but it seemed like for that Fritzie property, we went up to 2.8.
I think it was 2.8, and that was the Leonard one as well.
And that seemed like a lot. But, so, I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
My worry is not what the cost is for the developer. My worry is working for our community or not. And
I guess
I
that's
think
true.
going up to that,
That's
I think
true.
we need to think about that for a bit, but I think, and we have, but, and that's why we focus on townhomes being kind of the problem area, or the developments that seem to have the problem. And so we wanted to have something special, or not special, but dictated for them that was maybe a little bit different. And I think we just need to look at what's happening in the community and what we've seen over the years and make our best judgment on that without any other considerations.
And I also think that it'll give us the opportunity to make some of those decisions, right? And if someone comes up with a great, like they have really long driveways or they have really good parking situations or whatever, it will give us some of that latitude to.
The one we
make
just
those
saw last
case by
month,
case.
you had that big turnaround area in the back of it, there's room for other parking over there.
Right.
It laid out different, that might be an exception where we could say that might warrant less. But we have a standard that is what we need most of the time.
Part of the idea here is that this is the standard and thou shalt not go below this, which is actually why I appreciated the approach that we were taking before, which is that we use the standard, but via the master plan development approval, if you feel like the standard's not sufficient for some reason, it's easier to build upon that, in my opinion. Vaughn, you might see it differently, than it is to go below
below.
what the requirement is. We would
Good
not,
point,
as staff,
yeah.
feel comfortable saying, this is the rule, but you can approve it with less than that.
'Cause really,
I was a little confused by the comment that was made by the city council when the additional parking was required and agreed to by the people out there on the Del Monte property. I thought that was an additional thing that helped the project and everything else. If we would have accepted something lower, that may have been a good reason to criticize that particular point. But when there were more parking spaces that are normally required, you'd think that would be accepted and embraced, but because, I don't know, maybe there was some discussion after our meeting that said that they were being singled out or something, but I wasn't aware of that. I thought that was agreed to, and they were okay with it.
I think it's that simple, yeah. I really do.
So that confused me a little bit. I don't know why we would ever care if somebody says, hey, we're gonna give you 3 parking spaces per unit. Well, I'll take it, you know?
So really, this is raising.
There are
a
some,
couple-
not with townhomes, I don't know if I'd be worried about that, but there are some, we've talked about before, some of the multifamily, when you get a field of parking, that's not good either, so.
And I think this is the one question I have, or maybe we can discuss this, we do have a public hearing with this, but we're going from 2.5 to 3, but also we're changing the code for the tandem parking, which wasn't in the code before. So we're adding that additional parking as well, so we're adding quite a bit. So do we start creating parking fields in these groups, but maybe we don't, and maybe that's what we need to do. I think that's part of what we need to discuss as we kind of go forward through this. We still have, I think, multifamily.
This is a
Stack
pretty good,
flats, too.
this is a pretty good illustration of what we're talking about.
It is, this has
Right.
got the 2 different.
Where you got tandem parking, yeah.
There's no additional parking required for any of these units, 2-car garages and driveway spaces for 2 vehicles.
Right.
This is simply a different way to design the development, to where, still 2-car garages, but, obviously there's not the additional 20 feet. So these spaces that you see here, this is how the developer got to 2.5 with 2 in each of these, and this is the 0.5
There you go.
for these homes here. And I agree, this isn't, I think this is a design that we wouldn't necessarily want to say no to, and I think this probably becomes worse in some ways if you have an additional 20 feet here. And part of the goal is to be able to consolidate some usable space in the fronts of these homes, and in this case, at least from a design perspective, the actual front doors enter out onto different yard space in front of the units and that kind of a thing, which,
It's okay.
so this would be completely allowed with the way things are proposed now, but, for each of these different configurations here, there would need to be, with each of these different units in this configuration, there would be 1 more parking space required for them, and for each of these, there would be another half of a space required. Today, they provide 2.5, they instead would have to provide instead would have to provide, the way it's written, 3, so another half a space per.
Yeah, so what would that look like, and how would the developer fit that in?
They would lose units.
Right.
So there would be the additional cost of providing the parking itself, and they would lose density. You would have to consume additional space for parking.
So we would probably have a lot, so would one of the things is we'd have a lot less townhomes with driveways.
I think developers would think long and hard about what's the most advantageous way to design a project, yes.
I think we're asking a lot by not counting the ones in the driveways and adding another half a space. So my stance is still 2.75 or 2.8 and not count the driveways.
We didn't aim low with this, understanding that it's been a concern, given the direction that we've received. At least that's my feeling.
Probably
That's
from
my
me.
opinion. Is
Probably
we didn't.
from me.
Well, it's been uniform,
Yeah.
right? We haven't had anybody say necessarily that our parking requirements are too high for this use.
Not from the planning commission. Developers will tell us otherwise.
Yeah, exactly.
We had a couple
That's-
presentations on that.
We're responding to that. Well, there's another aspect altogether that.
Yeah, well,
we
let's
haven't
cover
had.
that, and then we can go into a public hearing and.
Okay.
And that's just me. I mean, obviously you have people that don't agree, and that's okay.
And let me say this, and, obviously, you've heard from some folks that have spent many, many thousands of dollars, probably tens of thousands of dollars, having parking studies done. The science, I think there is a lot to it. I don't think it's necessarily perfect, that's just my opinion. Although, as you look at other communities, you can see projects that have been built, that have been lived in for a number of years. You can look at their parking ratios, and you can see if there's a parking deficiency or not. And to some extent, that's what has been presented. That's what folks would like to have more conversations with you and the city council about. Nonetheless, in projects where we have higher parking requirements than other communities, we have people parking out on the streets around the project, parking in adjacent neighborhoods, and residents complaining that there's not enough parking in their neighborhood and that type of a thing. And that's very direct feedback that we get, that we take seriously. And this particular type of housing arrangement is something that we do have experience with. We have projects that have been built, this basic type of form, and lived in now for a really long time. And I think that gives us some insight that you don't necessarily get from studies that are conducted from what people's experience is in other communities.
And you're only going to see the amount of people living in a townhome. Like back when I was first married, it was a single couple, retired couple, whatever, living in townhomes, and they moved into a house. You're going to see families with more cars.
No doubt.
Yeah, that's
No
a good
doubt.
point. That's a really good point.
Chat about the other part of it, and this is where I need to talk a little bit once again, excuse me, I need to talk about a different aspect of our recommendation when we get to it. Oh,
Are those
Had
ladders
to point that out.
blocking the driveway there a bit? I mean,
Park
that
that truck?
sidewalk?
stay in your lane, huh? Is
That's
that
just
the
parking.
message?
Low raised if you walk around the sidewalk.
The engineer's telling you.
Bad luck.
That's a lot of bad lucks.
We don't have a lot of experience with parking when it comes to like a stacked flat kind of a product. And we've had a number of conversations, many. You've been involved in some of them with developers that would like to do or that are doing what we're talking about here. And right now, we apply the same parking requirement to these types of projects as what we have sorry, I'm not sure what I started with there. Whether it's a townhome project or an apartment project, the parking requirement's the same. Except in certain zoning districts, we don't require the same number of garage spaces. That being said, coming at the idea of how much parking is appropriate for apartments, let's just say, with the idea that less parking for that type of housing type than what you'd have for townhomes or single-family homes is appropriate. We've proposed this, honestly, as kind of at least a starting point for some conversation, with the idea that if the project is of a certain size, and I do think scale matters for a bunch of different reasons, particularly when you end up with parking configurations that are at least in part like parking lot. I think you can gain some efficiency, given how people live and that type of a thing. That's worth considering. So the proposal here would actually take the parking requirement overall from 2.5 down to 2.25. In my view, that's not a huge decrease. We're talking with folks right now that would like to see that number be at 2, or maybe less. And in fact, regardless of what you do with this, they'll probably be back asking for that change at some point in the future anyway. But this does bring some of the parking requirements out of other places in the code, like the 60% for garages and different things like that, to put it all in this place instead. But fundamentally, that's basically what's proposed to be changed for projects that have less than 200 spaces, 2.25. I feel like I maybe kind of misrepresented this a second ago. Again, as a starting point for discussion, if you have a bigger project than that, and kind of back again on the idea of scale, 2, we're suggesting now, to be clear, with all of the changes that we're proposing tonight, staff has recommended that they be approved. except for this change here. The Development Review Committee's recommendation on this is simply that no change be made for dwellings of this type until we have a few projects that have been built and lived in for a little while in Spanish Fork, and we have 1, 2, and maybe a third soon, maybe even a fourth soon. That'll be under construction. We have the first new residents of the community that have moved in now next to the neighborhood Walmart in that project. But I think the thought is really that we probably put this on the shelf for a few years to not only give some time for the projects to be finished, at least to the degree to where people could live in there long enough that we can see if the requirement that's been used is too much or not. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's, again, just the distinct part about staff's recommendation from the other things that we have to present tonight with that there.
So for your effort to consolidate the parking, would it just be like 2.5 or?
I think we'd go back to, yeah, we'd just do our best to match what's,
That's what the DRC discussed and recommended.
exactly, yes. Do you guys want to talk any more about parking before, the other changes I think I can get through quickly and simply, but this one, and I really mean it, if you wanted to take more time on this, we're not in a big rush incidentally for any of these. That's partly why we presented them tonight with the idea that we can come back in December if you'd like with anything.
I think I would like more time on it.
I would too. I think that we've talked about this now for quite a while, 2 or 3 years. And things have been bounced off of us, and I think that we've all noticed different projects, not just in Spanish Fork, but in other places. And you've seen some places that seem to work quite well, and other places that they're horrible. You've still got every space and every space out in front of these developments that are cars parked on the road, on the highway, whatever else, and it's really hard to determine how that should be done. And we've heard from some of these guys that have paid for studies and things that we haven't done. We haven't paid for one that I know of, but we are unique. Utah's unique in general, and along the Wasatch Front, each community is different. Salt Lake is becoming more urbanized, where we still have outdoor people, which means big trucks and motorhomes and trailers for four-wheelers and wave runners, and everybody's trying to find places to put those as well. And there are some examples of projects that are building, incorporating those kinds of things into their project, but they cost. It doesn't matter whether you're paying for it on site or in some kind of a storage space. It's going to cost you if you want those toys. So I think for us, we need to have some experience, right in Spanish Fork. It's kind of hard to say that, well, Springville's doing this or Payson's doing this, but I've gone around and looked at them, and actually driven through the parking lots and stuff to see how they look, and I don't feel qualified to come down on one side or the other with both feet. Gotcha. I can see some wisdom in lowering them in some cases, and in other places, to have more, because we live in a place where there's definitely some problems.
So would we be
Some pretty new.
No, go ahead, you started.
would we be comfortable with saying on the other Title 15 amendments, going through the public hearing, but tabling the parking part of this?
I think
Yes.
Dave said you can leave it, because anything we do can be changed. I mean, just like we're changing it, there can be a proposal again by someone else that wants to change it, and we can consider it, and the city council will either approve it.
I think we
or
also need
not.
to get some clarity for the developers. I mean, that's our goal, is to get some,
I think that's what we're trying to do,
Yeah.
but by the same token, I'm just not, everybody that we talk to, I kind of get convinced by what they're saying. And I think that Todd's a very good resource for us, being on that side of things, and I know that if I was going to sink multi-millions of dollars into a project, I would want to know in black and white what my requirements are going to be. And then I could make a decision, do I put my money into this project in Spanish Fork, or do I go to Santaquin? And that's kind of what we're talking about. So, you know, if you know what you're up against, then you can make your decision. And, or if there's a project that is worthy of some other consideration, maybe it can be considered further down the line and it can be changed. But it shouldn't be easy, and it shouldn't be done just at the whim of the next developer that comes to ask for a large development to be approved with lower density or whatever, or, you know, lower parking or whatever.
If it doesn't work here, that doesn't, if it goes to Sanquin, oh well, it's not right for here. Maybe it's not right there, maybe it works there, that's
Yeah,
fine. But,
I
I mean, there's some things I want to make sure we're aware of. In most of the things I built, those 60%, those 120 garages in that scenario are storage units. So that leaves your parking spaces, just take those right out. And then you're left with like 1.6 units or spaces for actual cars to be parked.
And I think that's one of the biggest concerns is that regardless of what we do, you know, about 40% of the garages are gonna be storage spaces.
Right.
And how do you tell them you can't do that? We've had some builders come in and say, or developers say, well, we're gonna police that and not allow that. Well, if your guy that's on duty there every day goes home at night, he never sees the garage door open and doesn't see what's going on. Anyway, I think what Todd's saying is absolutely right, that as we look at all of these things, you know, people need space for their stuff.
I guess another way to ask the question is, do we feel comfortable in making a recommendation tonight on the proposal?
I don't.
You don't?
I don't.
Okay. Sean,
I'd like to have someone I'm comfortable as me.
more time?
I'd like to have some more time to go over that. I think this is great, I really do. I just want to have some more time to ponder on some things. That's my feeling.
Impact any developments?
Imminent proposals, no, so.
Todd, I'd like to ask
I'm
Todd,
fine with-
Todd, you've had the experience in this. Where do we go for more information on what we're talking about? How do we?
I'd say we just go drive some places. I mean, when Dave's talking about looking at things 2 years down the road, we can go to Provo, Lehigh. I mean, there's places we can go on a field trip and go look at things that are 2, 3 years, 10 years old now. And see how that community's dealing with it.
I'd like to see developments that are well parked, that they don't have a problem, and see what their numbers, what their garage count numbers are.
And we have that, I mean, I think that's a good thing to do. There's a lot that are good, that we might just see a different mix than we see here in Spanish Fork, but that's gonna change as time goes on. There's a lot of, I mean, I think Jackson, with the due diligence he does on researching things, he could find a whole list of places to go
That's
see.
right.
Oh, another homework assignment for Jackson.
But in that tour, I wouldn't mind seeing one or two that aren't working
Yeah.
Oh, you,
and ask why.
Well, one's right by my house.
We know that one. But, you know, I'm kind of surprised by one in Springville that's on Main Street that is near Fourth South, and it is a 3 or 4 story unit. And so they don't have any on-street parking, they can't. And I thought, well, where in the heck is this parking? And I went into the Jimmy John's to get a sandwich. Well, there's all their parking back there, and somehow they're making it work. I don't know how. Part of it is that I think the first floor is business rather than living spaces. But nonetheless, they're making it work. And so,
That one's low-income senior housing,
Is it?
Where's that?
south of the Little Caesars on
Oh,
South
yeah.
Street.
well, and
Yeah.
and it's senior citizen living too. So that's gonna limit the number of vehicles too.
And I
That's how it
drive,
works.
Typically, yeah.
and I often drive through the one that's across the street to the west, those new apartments there, and those are all parked on the road. I mean,
Don't like
the
that.
road is full
Is
of cars
on both
every
sides.
time, both sides, yeah.
A narrow
Joseph,
road.
anything to add to the parking?
Yeah, so I
Leave it
read
as
through
it
it
is.
all before as well, and
I also would like more time. Specifically, my thought was more time to actually drive communities nearby in the evenings when people are most likely to be home. One of the thoughts I'm having as far as the townhomes increasing to 3 parking spaces is I'm concerned that it might be asking for more space than is needed, and I think potentially we should consider the average number of bedrooms per townhome. So there's Salisbury townhomes near me, some of them have 5 bedrooms. That's very different than a 3-bedroom as far as parking needs. And the square footage absolutely matters when it comes to townhomes, in my opinion, and the amount of parking needed. And then on the apartments, I really liked Todd's comment about the garages. I think that's important for us to consider. And then on the flip side, that provides more parking to the apartments in our community is the R4's standard that the dwelling units front or abut a public right-of-way, which means on-street parking, which is not counted in the overall parking. So I'm wondering if the proposed change is good on the apartments, but we don't
About a little bit.
quite, I don't know with certainty that it is. Ridgeline isn't built, but we can drive to other ones like it. So, yeah, I'm okay. I would like to table it, actually,
Table
but
it.
I would prefer that we do not vote to approve the townhome change either.
Right.
Because
Well, yeah,
I think it might be more than is needed.
My, I guess, recommendation or my thought would be that the whole parking part of Title 15, this whole section, we table that, and then the construction standards, those other things we can go through.
Sounds great
Because,
to me.
yeah, I agree too. And my question with the townhome parking is, if we're requiring a minimum of 3, but we're also taking away a driveway spot, that's us requiring 1.5 more spots per townhome,
In some
correct?
cases. Yep.
Anyway, just to be clear,
Just a
yeah, to
thought,
be
yeah.
clear about that, yeah. Anyway, yes.
Okay,
So
Dave, do you wanna go?
what's the prime time that people are parked that we should be driving by and
9
through?
PM.
8, 9, yeah,
8 or 9?
9 to 5 a.m.,
yeah. It's true.
9 p.m. to 5 a.m. probably.
Apparently Todd's working during that time, so.
I'm up.
Yeah.
Jackson will be looking for your list.
Was there other Title 15 updates besides these
Can I
that you've
touch
already
on
went
them
through?
quickly? I think I can, yeah. Mr. Clark? I believe those are, yeah, that's it for parking. 2 other things. One of them is primarily cleanup. Yep, this one. The cleanup part is connected to us no longer allowing private streets. We still reference private streets in this section of the code. It is just something that is bled over, even though we've made other changes elsewhere. Beyond that, and I shouldn't call this cleanup, we are trying to make the process that a developer has to go through and the bar that a project has to get to in order to be approved as a master plan development more clear. That's how I would put it. So the other proposed changes that are referenced, particularly a little bit lower towards the end, Mike.
While you're on page 1,
Yeah.
are you going to insert some other definition of a master plan development so someone knows when they're actually applying for a master plan development?
Our idea is that this defines master plan development.
Okay, awesome.
That's the idea, I think. Get down to the end of the memo, Mike. No, sorry, you were there. End of, yeah, just, so we've changed what previously had intended to be descriptive of what a project needs to do for the council to be able to approve it as a master plan development, to have this language instead of what was labeled findings before. The intent of that is simply to make it clear that it's up to the city council. They have complete discretion as to whether or not a project gets approved as a master plan development or as a standard subdivision. Trying to make it clear that in order for a project to qualify as a master plan development, there has to be something unique, some benefit to the community as a whole. Generally, I think we're talking about some type of a design improvement to get to that point, and that's it. the last change. A lot of text with this. Talked to a couple of different people now about this. And in this context, when we talk about addressing environmental concerns, we're talking primarily about the history of a property's land use and the idea that there might be some potential contamination, either because of what happened on a property or maybe in the vicinity of a property or something like that, to where we would have a formal description of what we would expect the development to do before a project could be approved when there's a question about some type of contamination. They have to do what's referred to as a phase 1 environmental study. And depending on what that says, the developer might also have to do a phase 2 environmental study. And depending on what that says, maybe even some other things. This is all about discovering what's on a site and what needs to do to repurpose that site to make it ready for a new use. What we're proposing, we memorialize with this text here and really make law. Syncs up with the practice that we've been following. So just to throw out a couple of examples of that. Sunrock's property on Arrowhead Trail, which is now the Arrowhead subdivision. We know what had been going on there for many decades. We knew that that probably warranted some attention in terms of does stuff need to be cleaned up before people start to live on that property and that type of a thing. So we worked with the developer to hire a professional team to evaluate what's on the site via doing a phase 1, what had been going on the site that, because of the nature of the use of the property and what they discovered, led to a more in-depth study, the phase 2, which then led to a cleanup plan for the property. While a developer is funding the studies that make those determinations, and we have our own environmental professional that reviews that work. So because none of us here are qualified per se to tell whether or not what's being recommended is suitable or not, we have our own folks doing peer review of that work, and that is how we go through the process of making sure that before sites get adapted to new uses, and primarily we're concerned about non-residential properties getting used for residential uses. There's a procedure to go through that's spelled out in this section of the code that's consistent with best practices and industry standards.
Does the developer pay for the city's environmental experts' work?
That has not been the case typically, no.
Does
There
this
have been a
ordinance
couple of-
require it?
I think this ordinance does give the city the ability to pass that cost on, yes.
I think it's, I don't
Does it
know
say
if it's
required?
discretionary in the ordinance, just from what I remember reading. So I wanted to make
I
sure
think
you
that's
were
right.
aware of that and whether or not you felt like that was an appropriate cost to pass on to the developer when they're not controlling the hours of work of the city's consultant. Because the city can hire them and have them do as much work as they want, knowing they're gonna bill the developer, and the developer has no control over how many hours that person spends on it at their rate.
Is it appropriate? That depends, right? It is consistent with our practice when it comes to other types of testing and things like that that go on with development. We have third-party consultants that help us with soils testing and different things like that, inspections.
And like traffic.
Oh, yeah, that's not even my concern. I think that's good. That's just prudent. I'm wondering if it's appropriate that the developer's paying for the government's consultants
The developers in those cases is, and.
directly, even though they're paying for it indirectly through impact fees and development fees and all that. That's
Development
coming
fees.
from the city's, slush here, and they are indirectly paying for it. I'm just wondering if it's appropriate that they directly pay for it.
And I think to some extent, there's no guarantee that the city would have funds coming in from development application fees or that type of thing to cover all of these costs. So I think at least having that articulated in the ordinance is something that the city could do, is the idea, for sure. I can think of cases where the city has paid for that oversight work. I know that has happened.
My guess is historically, the city pays for it more often than not, up to this point, is my guess. But
I can think of cases where we've gone both ways. And then the difference has been, I think, that in cases where we knew there was something up front, and we sat down with the developer and said, hey, you're gonna have to do a phase one, and because of what's there, we're pretty sure that's gonna say phase two, et cetera, et cetera. We can picture not
What's
just
the-
hundreds but thousands of dollars worth of bills, tell the developer up front, you're gonna have to pay for not only your guys' work, but also the work that the city has to do.
And if it's in the code, then and if they're aware of it, that's good. What's the prerequisite for requirement of this? What size of project? What type of project?
This is set up so that everything,
Someone comes in and they want a building permit for their house.
sorry, any development application and just a building permit typically would not be that.
Even an acre.
Conceivably, this does give us some discretion out of that,
In
I
in an
think.
area that's never had environmental issues before, and we know that the last 5 did not have them, and we still have to require it per the code? We don't have discretion?
Let me look at that.
Okay, I'm just wondering about when it makes sense that the city doesn't want one, I wouldn't want it to be binding. It's a necessary cost sometimes, especially when we know the area. If we know the area's clean, that's different. A lot of areas we know are not, and that's why this code is important. I actually like it.
I'll use an
You probably
example.
can't tell
I used
from
this
my
example
questions, but
earlier
I actually
today.
think this is a good thing. I'm just trying to clean it up a little
In
bit.
terms of, you're saying this, and I know what you mean, and I know what you intend, and I don't think I totally disagree, but we don't know. And we found that through different experiences. I used this example earlier today.
But you will start to know as you require
Well,
these throughout the city,
here's
because
the-
of any phase one is gonna provide the historical on the area, and then you're gonna know.
My introduction to this was the first year of my career working for a development company. They put a piece of property under contract in Lehigh, greenfield. Farm looked like it had been cultivated since the dawn of time, and I think it probably had been. But yet, before we closed, the company had some policies, we did a phase one. And that consultant, reviewing the property and the history and things like that, discovered that a farm next to the property that we were looking to purchase had a fuel tank on it, buried in the ground. Said, better do a phase two. We do a phase two, and sure enough, that tank had leaked, and test identified hydrocarbons, fuel, traces of fuel and things like that underneath the property that we were scheduled to purchase. Middle of a farm, just south of Main Street, west of Lehigh. So that, in my mind, would be a perfect candidate for us to say, no way. Phase one out there on that, but, so that's partly where we're coming from. I think we probably could identify examples of properties where it's overkill to do a phase one, but also, I think it's really common that particularly anytime there's any type of a loan involved on a property, a financier is gonna require a phase one at least, so I don't think in most cases we're requiring anything that's out of norm. What would be different than what we've been doing in the past is the city is gonna make a point to be in the review loop of that to make sure that we know what's being discovered and that kind of a thing. But
That
you
part's
raise, I
unique,
think honestly, a
but-
good point. Maybe it does make sense to build in an out someplace, to not make it mandatory all the time.
Even if it's at the discretion of the planning director, the discretion of the whatever, it is this
There's
unless
some mechanism.
Dave Anderson deems otherwise. It is the following unless your position,
I don't know if we want Dave making environmental decisions.
Dave Anderson.
Dave likes it less than you think. So, yeah.
I'm just waiting for Joseph to argue the other side.
I really could.
I know you can. You
Which is
do.
why, so I talked to Dave about this, and I actually am in favor of it. I think it's good housekeeping for the city, as long as the city's willing to take on the expense and cost of actually managing this. It's great. It's a good thing.
The Highway 51 is a great example of,
It is.
we didn't ever see it, and it was, some phrasing led to it being, oh, it's nothing. Then it ended up being very expensive.
Site on the south side of Expressway Lane, right at the intersection of Expressway Lane and State Road 51, where we've thought, hey, that's landfill. And told the developer going through the review process, hey, that's landfill. The developer got a phase one done on the property. They say no further actions necessary on their phase one. Our guys didn't review that. The developer proceeded to build the project on the property, starts to dig for whatever they needed to do there, and they uncover enough garbage that everybody then understands, oh, that's old landfill, this is real-time stuff that's going on over there. And to make a long story short, now they're telling us it's anywhere from a $300,000 to $1 million bill to reclaim the site, to get it to where they can put it to the use that it was approved for. And I don't know if their decision-making would have changed on the front end had they done more due diligence relative to studying the site and that type of a thing. Our perspective would have changed, I'm told, if our environmental consultant would have been privy to the phase one and what it said, given what he knows about the property and what he was able to discover about it with some quick research. We're not necessarily in it to help protect developers and property owners from getting themselves into difficult situations to get out of. We're more in it, to protect the city as an organization, future property owners and that type of a thing. But certainly this is as well intended to help make it so that people don't get into situations like that one, at least without knowing what's going on.
And when they do, to make sure it's remediated correctly,
Right. Biggest deal.
so that we don't have citizens dealing with it. But we have on my projects, Joseph, and this is no surprise to you, but our biggest change
I
orders,
imagine all of your projects have contamination.
our biggest change orders come out of the unforeseen conditions that we dig up as we're starting excavation.
Oh, for sure.
We have one in Colorado where we're $1.2 million
Yeah,
in
I understand.
just
It does, it happens.
Mass X change orders.
Okay. Any questions for Mr.
Unfortunately,
Anderson?
it'll still happen, even under this
It will.
program. If they don't know what they don't know, and unless they put the entire site in Swiss cheese.
Oh, we've had sites that have had 16 bores and they've missed every old existing foundation that was there.
Yeah, my point
Yeah.
exactly.
Murphy's Law.
Yeah.
Exciting stuff. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
So exciting. Thanks, Dave.
Around for as long as you want. Public hearing.
Well, with that, let's go into public hearing. So we're entering public hearing. You guys want to speak to this? No? Okay, then we're going to leave public hearing. Any discussions on any of those other ones outside of the parking? No?
Ready to make a motion?
Do we need to make that motion, Vaughn, with us changing removing the parking? Do we need to say anything different? Or?
Yeah, you can make a motion to approve the three others,
Okay.
and then leave the parking off for future consideration.
Can it be in one motion? That? Okay. You guys are okay with me making a motion?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we might actually do it too.
Okay. You might pass it. I move the planning commission recommends approval of each of the proposed amendments except for the parking amendments, which we would like tabled for future review.
Second.
Any discussions on that motion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, it passes. Do we want? Yep.
They had their chance. They're regretting it now.
Transportation, that could take at least 2 hours.
Heaven help us if it does, I'll tell you. Whoa. I spoke more about this earlier today than maybe I should have, so I'm going to be really brief. You remember Modera, that was approved by the city council earlier this year. Handful of things have happened that have caused that to proceed more slowly than what the applicants had anticipated. Approved with a total of 668 units. Of those, 228 were presented as condominium units to be subdivided into individually conveyable homes. And as it went through the approval process, a condition was imposed to require that of the condominium units, 50% of those be owner occupied, somehow be maintained with owner occupancy. So that'd be 114 homes in the development. And the applicant is requesting that requirement that those homes be owner occupied be removed.
The single-family homes? They don't have any.
No single-family homes. When I say they're condominium
condominium
homes,
homes.
units.
Okay, and it's specific to the condominiums, not any of the townhomes?
The only, well, it's
There's no
apartments, stacked flat apartments, and stacked condominium units are the two housing,
Got it.
two structural types there. Nothing relative to the apartments, right? That very clearly would be 100% renter occupied. So yeah, only applying to that part of the project, the westernmost part right here. That would be the condominium units. That's the proposal. The Development Review Committee had some discussion on it earlier today and recommended that this request be denied. In my words, the main reason for recommending that the request be denied is the belief that some part of the project needs to be owner occupied. I could go into more detail, but maybe I also could just leave it at that. And that's where it is.
Any questions for Dave?
That was way uncharacteristically brief.
Developers,
Mr.
do you guys want to
Anderson.
come up and speak to that?
My name's Pete Matank. We've been part of this project, working on it for almost 3 years now. So I appreciate you guys letting us come and present this. And I know that it's already gone through careful consideration and review and been approved with these conditions. We understand that. And we understand that we haven't met all the conditions to get final plat approval. We received preliminary approval earlier this year. But initially, when as we've been working on this over the years, we were comfortable with that condition, and we thought it was reasonable. It's just with market changes and conditions changing, we are running into issues with it, essentially issues with financing and lenders and capital for it with that condition in place, with the slowdown of sales and things like that. And so that's the big challenge that we're trying to request this change to be made.
Would you have the same financing issues if this doesn't change? Or are the financing issues specific to this condition?
Specific to this condition.
Okay.
Yes, and
Your
and we-
financing for the construction or for your sellers, your pre-purchases or with your end-use customer?
for construction is at the moment, but the.
Do you own the land? Sorry, this will help me too. Do
We
you
have a
own the land
purchase-
now?
We have a purchase agreement on it.
So potentially for your land acquisition loan, if there is one, and your future construction loan, that's what's causing a problem?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And honestly, we probably wouldn't have had this issue if we hadn't had the referendum and the delays from that. Just based on timing with the market conditions, we had things lined up and we're ready to go. And I understand. I don't expect the Planning Commission to be sympathetic to our financial struggles as a developer, but we wanted to come here and we realized we're at your mercy, and I wanted to make the request. And I have some, we get in a lot of thought and have some points that I'd like to kind of make to illustrate why this is also, important for the city and the citizens and residents of the city also. So, but yes, to answer your questions with the funding.
Yes, thank you.
So, and you may or may not know, but this condominium half of the project and the apartment half of the project has been essentially, for the whole period of time, it's been two separate development groups. We're involved with the condominium part on the west, and you may not remember, almost 3 years ago, my business partner and I came in, we presented a really early on, conceptual plan for that, and it was just that western portion. And then as things progressed, we ended up in conjunction with the apartment side, but they're still separate. I understand that from the city's perspective, it's one applicant, it's one project, it has one approval. We respect that, we understand that. But just so you're aware, the one half of the project is getting all apartments, and we're not necessarily requesting that to be changed. That would also complicate things. But our half of the project that we're involved with has very different restrictions than what the eastern side. And if you look at the general plan, that further west is supposed to be higher density, more applicable to apartments, all those things. So just for what it is, that's kind of where we're at. So we met with DRC this morning. Obviously, as Dave said, they recommended denying our request, and we understand that issue. But as we listen to the comments and discussion there, we realize that there's a few things that the city really cares about or seems to care about, and and obviously you can let us know what's more important to you, but seems like the city wants affordable housing, and you want to have some stability in your neighborhoods, and essentially the way that you're trying to establish that stability is through owner occupants. And we agree that owner occupants are good for the city. They're invested in the city, they are more long-term, there's less turnover, and it's just more stable. We understand that. But in the current market conditions, we're seeing a strong trend that is making it extremely difficult for young people to become homeowners. And that's essentially requiring them to become long-term renters. We believe that, at least for the foreseeable future, we're going to see the majority of people that otherwise would have been homeowners for this product type. These are 2-bedroom units that we're talking about, 2-bedroom condos. And so the people that would have been purchasing those, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to purchase them in the current market conditions.
What do you think the price point will be? What's the retail sales price for a unit like that?
Expectation right now is going to be right around $300,000. And so with that in mind,
Figured out the monthly payment with the current interest rates?
Yes.
At around 7%?
yes, so with a $300,000 purchase and a 7% interest and a FHA loan, putting 3% down after mortgage insurance, property taxes, HOA fees, the monthly payment for a owner occupant is going to be about $2,500 a month for a 2-bedroom condo in this kind of project. Now, adversely, we are very in tune with the rental market. We own a property management company in the area for 8 years and are in tune with that. So these would rent right now for about $1,500 a month. So we're talking about, it's going to cost an owner occupant about $1,000 a month more to live there than a renter would pay to live there. Obviously, by the time these are built, things may change a little bit and shift, and the rental market has increased rapidly over the last few years. It's probably going to continue a little bit more, especially if interest rates remain high. But so with that in mind, I mean, to obtain the stability that the city's looking for, I believe that it's in this product type, it's going to have to be renters. They're just not going to find many owner occupants that are going to be able to purchase and stay in those homes. But we think you can have long-term, stable renters that are invested in the community, that are contributing to the community, that are good citizens of Spanish Fork, that are able to rent in this type of community. And it's going to be a brand new, nice community with good amenities. It's going to be attractive. It's going to attract quality people. So that's kind of one of the main points. And then as far as affordability, we talked a bit about that with those cost of living and monthly payments. So, and we're just asking we're not asking for these to be changed to apartments. We still want them to be condominiums, and we still would have the intent to sell as many of them as we can and sell to owner occupants as much as possible. The request is just to give an option, and it's an option for us if the project isn't sellable when it's completed, that we have the option to hold it until it is sellable as a rentals, and then we can sell the units. Or it's also an option for owner occupants that do purchase in this community, that they have the option to sell the units, or that they have the option to rent the units in the event that they have a job transfer or some other reason to leave or relocate, that they're not stuck with a property that the only thing they can do is live in it. And especially in bad market conditions, we don't want them to be forced to sell and potentially at a loss or a negative impact to them for any other reason, right? So that is our request, some of our logic and reasoning behind it. We've been working really hard on the project. We really want to make it move forward. We want to see it move forward, and we're going to continue to do that. Removing this condition would help us ensure that we can move forward with it without any further delays. So appreciate your careful consideration and time on it, and thank you.
Any questions?
I have one question for you before you leave. So it sounds like you got the two projects are separated in all intent. Is the financial part of this development also split
Yes.
So and you are the developer of the condominium area on the
Correct.
west. So you're trying to secure financing for that part while the apartments are going forward with another developer and another loan.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have a question for staff. When this was presented to us, wasn't this project presented as phased? And it would go apartments, then some of the condos, then apartments? Is that correct?
That's correct. The apartments and the condominiums could certainly be built simultaneously or concurrently.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help?
Yeah, but I'm wondering, so if at that time, was that the plan at that time? Was that just how it was presented to us? Because if it's
There's-
two different ownerships, what's
There's-
creating the phasing is what I'm wondering.
The need for particular pieces of infrastructure, the biggest one being.
Sure, I understand that from our aspect. I'm wondering from their aspect why, how they're.
How many units as well in the condominium portion are we talking about?
228 units.
Yeah.
And half of those have to be owner-occupied?
Yeah, so 114.
14, I think, yeah.
We've always been under the impression, the expectation that the condos could be built simultaneously to the apartments. The only issue is the offsites are primarily coming from the east. So either we would
You don't
pay
run
for
all
those
through theirs.
offsites,
Yeah, yeah.
or we wait for them to put in the
Right.
offsites and then we connect. So that's the only reason why we would expect to be waiting on theirs, on that portion of the project.
Okay.
Any other questions?
How could a mortgage be 2,500, but renting it, you'd rent it for 1,500?
That's just the nature of the market right now. I mean, it's market demands and supply and everything, like nice two-bedroom units right now are renting for about 1,500. Some nicer three-bedroom townhomes and condos are renting for maybe closer to 2,000. So that's the kind of the cap and the max you can get on rent. And then a mortgage is just with the 7% rate, that's where it ends up. And a lot of that is the down payment, right? That's kind of considering the potential owner type that we would have, a first-time home buyer with an FHA loan putting a very minimal down payment. Whereas an investor that would be putting 25% down or potentially paying cash for it and then renting out the unit would obviously be able to make it pencil.
Are you going to phase this project as well, so that you'll have half of the units built and then the other half, or?
I believe our
Or are you
phasing
gonna go
plan,
for it all?
I would need to really answer those questions carefully. I need to talk to our engineer, but I believe our phasing plan is that the condos are all one phase. And the phase, we already have that?
Well, on this exhibit, this says phase 1 right here, and this says phase 2.
We have maybe better imaging than that, Mike. Yeah.
There's sub-phases, I guess, within those phases.
Which is opposite what we were just talking about.
Yeah, it's down.
Going right there.
Okay, yeah,
Oh,
you've
it
got,
changed on there.
Phase 3.
Is phase 3 the apartments, or is that still part of the condos?
Phase 3 is
That's condos.
everything on the left of that center roundabout is the condos,
Oh,
and everything on the right is the apartments.
It's a question for staff. The applicant mentioned that they are going to do their best, good faith effort sort of thing, to try and sell every single condo before renting it. Is there some sort of method the city might have to enforce something like that? I'm thinking through it and I'm drawing blanks. I'm not sure of something that actually has teeth to it that would actually require them to put them all up for sale for a certain amount of time and actually do a good faith effort to sell each one. That's one thought I'm having as far as trying to work with them, because if that's, I'm thinking I'd rather have the project than not, even if they're renters, especially, and yet if the city's interest is to have owner occupied and they're willing to try and sell each one first, is there a way that we can do that? So if you could think about it, if you come up with something.
Honestly, I don't have to think much about it. I mean, just anytime we're talking about intent, we don't have a way to.
That's what I'm thinking. That's where I'm at. I was just thinking I was just hoping you were way smarter than me. And usually you are, so.
Easy. We both know.
Usually you're way ahead of me.
You couldn't do something like they need to be for sale for
But
a
then,
year.
it's just hard, because then they may or may not be trying that hard, or
Right.
maybe asking a price that's unrealistic, or, I mean, it's just really hard.
I've had
And we can't
facilities-
speak to your intents, it's just things that have happened in the past and what we see going on, you know.
We understand that. And things change with developments and projects as they move
Right.
along, lots of things
There are
change.
amenities to your development that aren't part of these, right?
They were separate amenities, right?
Yes. Essentially, the amenities and the parking and everything is structured in the way that they can stand alone separately. And we would actually love to have them separated at this point, just so that we could, because we're kind of waiting on, we're ready to go. We have been for a few months. We're waiting on some architecture from the apartments. That's one of the big holdups why we haven't got everything submitted for final yet, but we've been told that we have to, if we were to separate, then we would have to start the process all over with a whole new application, go through potentially another referendum and all those things.
So remind me of the amenities in the condos.
Remember what those are, Clint? I think
Playgrounds, there's two playgrounds.
splash pad or pool or something like
There's a
that.
clubhouse, sorry,
That's on the Smith Center.
Isn't that the clubhouse right here?
that's the clubhouse right there.
Right.
There's a separate one for these guys and you have your
There's a
own.
playground here and a
Yeah.
playground up here. So all the amenities on this meet the city's requirements as a standalone project, as do all these over here. We designed it that way, like he said, we started this probably about 8 months before they started theirs, and then we joined together, for offsites.
Question on intent of number 4 to staff. Don't sit down, you're good. Staff, I have a question for you. For number 4, the condition number 4, the provision that no less than 50% of the condominium homes may be owner occupied, is it the city's desire that that is enforced in perpetuity? Is that the plan? So probably the only way to do that, it would be potentially deed restricted, particular units that they have to be owner occupied. Is there,
I thought it would be in CCNRs or something like that.
That's how other developments have done it. That's exactly it.
yeah, CCNRs even maybe deed restrict, because even if it's in CCNRs, and I could see some of these people selling it and not actually complying, and then it's hard to undo that.
My question
Or renting
for staff is, what's the requirement of the stacked condos by the neighborhood Walmart? This is the similar,
I don't think there was one.
right?
They're for sale.
Just looked at that recently, it's 50
You're
as well.
right.
That's right.
Was it, if I recall, I was in that meeting when they approved final, if I recall, there wasn't a specific requirement. They said that they intended to go with FHA financing, which requires it. But did the city put a specific
We
requirement for them as well?
usually do say
We
that.
reviewed it recently, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, yeah.
But to answer your question, yes, it's a 50% requirement. We've reviewed it recently because they've talked about taking some of the units and dedicating them exclusively to like a rental kind of a setup, and wanted to make sure that they weren't gonna be out of kilter with the ratio that we were expecting to see if they were to do that. For example, there's one building that's kind of distinct from the others, and they'd like to look at marking that a little bit differently than having them as for sale units, so.
So grouping their for rent and their for sale by building, but keeping that ratio.
Yeah, exactly.
Question, going back to what you said on the CCNRs, how does the city enforce that?
Come on up to the
We
mic.
don't.
Once it's transferred from owner to owner to owner?
Yeah, it's not,
It's a CCNR.
CCNRs would be enforced by the people who live there. They're the ones who have a claim, they have standing, otherwise it's, but as far as the finance, if it wasn't for the financing issue, I would say, go do it. And if you don't sell 50% of them, and we would know they built them, and a lot of these units were vacant, we would know that doesn't make sense for anyone to do. And then we would know they have a real hardship, and maybe I would feel like I'd be more sympathetic. It's the financing issue I can't.
Yeah, I get,
I can't solve all the problems.
all your points are good, and you went through it and you made a lot of good points. I still stick with the reason why there is that 50% claim. For the reasons, the same reasons you're stating,
Yeah.
I would still like to have homes available, condos available at that price range that are available to people in our community. So I still want those for sale, that for sale product. I feel for you. I understand what you're going through. I'm there myself in some cases. But for the reason why that was put in, my reasoning for that has just been enhanced by the interest rates going up. And so I would still be for that requirement staying.
For what it's, I currently, if we were voting right now, I'd come out the same way. And I'm optimistic that if they call a few more banks, if they try a little bit more, maybe they have to raise up a little bit more equity to their percentage of the loan to value. But I'm optimistic they can do it. The neighborhood, the condos by the Walmart were able to do it. I'm
I was in
optimistic.
a very different market. That was 2 years ago. So, I mean, we could have done it, we could have done it 6 months ago.
That's where I'm at on it.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to the financing too, but I have a son that's, and I don't know if this makes a difference, but a son that lives in a very similar, really nice place like this, and he's paying $2,200 a month for his rent, and his wife, and that's a lot, but they're doing it because that's what's available, and they want to live in a nice place and not a junky place.
Want any comments?
Maybe one more, as I can tell kind of where it's heading, right? I mean, we're open to other potential things here, right? I mean, we would ideally like it to be completely removed, but if not, maybe a reduction in it, or potentially what Dave was mentioning that they've requested on the other, on the neighborhood Walmart project is if we, and I'm not sure if it was even specified whether it would be required or would not be required, but possibly if we could build the first, if we could phase that into a way where we build half the buildings and those could all be rentals, and then when by the time those are finished, hopefully the market's improved, conditions have changed, and then we could build the other half as as for sale, strictly owner occupied.
I don't think we stipulated that when we did the approval, did we?
Given that specific, a lot of times we're sensitive to the idea that at the end of the project, our options become more limited, but
And that's why we have amenities in first phases,
different things like that.
the
Yeah.
But
the common areas in
amenities
first
don't get
phases.
built.
We gotta make sure that the things that we need are being built as the phases roll out.
as is, nothing would stop them from doing that, building half the project, right, and waiting.
I think, I'd be willing to say that,
Yeah, other than the public improvements that will get done either way, because even if we have to use the bond money, it's gonna get done.
With each building, it'd have to be plat recorded still, different things like that, but.
Appreciate it.
John, any more comments? No, I think I'm in the same breath, so we would need to make a motion on this.
For what it's worth, I was trying to rack my brain of how to make it work, and I couldn't.
Figure it out.
Kind of hard.
I think that, but I do think that option, the last option might be helpful.
Would someone like to make that motion?
What motion?
We have to make a motion on this to either approve or deny
I'll make a
the
motion.
application.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the request for modification to the conditions of the Modera subdivision be rejected.
Okay, we got a motion? We have a second on that?
Second.
Second, okay. All in favor of denying that application request?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. That's,
Shauna, how'd you vote on that? I wasn't sure.
I know,
Did you
I didn't
vote?
say.
Did you vote? I think we kind of want to
That's
know,
painful for me.
for the record.
I guess, yeah.
I appreciate how Joseph calls her out.
I mean, Jesse, how did she vote?
I didn't hear,
I don't know how she voted.
She abstained.
did you abstain?
Was I not supposed to say anything?
I knew someone would catch me on that.
Jackson was gonna catch you if Joseph didn't.
Don, did you vote?
I did.
Yeah.
Good, sir.
Yeah.
Everyone voted to deny the application. Shauna is
I'm voting
Ups-
against it.
against
just
it.
For,
So you voted?
wait,
Are
I'm
you
voting
did-
opposite of these guys.
Okay, yeah, that's good. That feels right.
And that, this does not go to the city council.
It does.
Yeah, sure will.
We are recommending denial.
Recommending it be denied. Okay. Thank you. Thanks for coming. All right, now on to the fun stuff. I'm just kidding. General plan, public hearing, transportation master plan amendment. Mike, is this you?
I'd like to make a motion, Chairman.
What's that?
I move we recommend approval of the transportation master plan.
We have to do
As
just
amended.
do a couple things real quick.
Oh, does that jump the gun?
Yeah.
I reviewed it. I think it looks great. I really
Me
did.
too, but I love hearing
I
the,
really did review it.
I love seeing the presentation.
Isn't it also a public hearing?
Yeah, it's a public
It's also a
hearing.
public hearing.
We also have Vaughn with us, who Vaughn will keep us in order.
He is getting the brownie, so
Do the brownie break.
Doing a brownie break.
It's all you.
okay. Well, do you want me to go through them? What do you want me?
Yeah,
I'll do
give us
whatever you want
give us
me
a
to.
quick
Quick
overview
run
of
through.
them.
Hit the high points.
Especially putting a roundabout over on there, 4th North.
Yeah, I like roundabouts. It's the Todd
Bad
special.
idea.
We'll put a bust of Todd, his statue of him in there. I think we talked
Pointing
about
the
this
way to go.
before.
Look at that green
Main Street
square.
fails in 2050, even with new interchanges and such. We pay a lot of money to maintain a lot of really wide roads that aren't used, if you've been to 3rd East. So this was working with a traffic engineer, WCG, Jeremy Searle, to come up with ways that would use alternative routes so Main Street is less congested. 40% of people that use Main Street don't live in or are traveling to Spanish Fork. They're traveling through Spanish Fork to get somewhere. 20% are in town and stay in town, and then 40% are commuters. Anyway, looking through this, he modeled it. We took out stop signs, we added roundabouts, we tried different things, and this is where.
What are all the, what's the legend of what all that is?
The squares
Or
are
roundabouts.
just something at the intersection where it's a roundabout or a signal. And then these are to change the orientation of the stop signs.
So black is to remove, the red is to remain? What is the?
Red is to remove, and they'd go to the black. So you would have,
Means it goes this way. It's changing the through to,
So it would have,
there's no stop. If you're on Center Street, you don't stop.
okay. Since I've almost been killed several times going like to your parents' home on going into Third West, I don't like when you move stop signs, but okay.
This one right here.
Yes. My whole life, people had to stop coming down Third West. And
Right.
they're probably irritated with me pulling in front of them as they're
You know how
doing.
many times I've still stopped on that intersection too?
Yeah, well,
Just
Do it all the time.
Stop, get honked at. So the idea of Third West, Third East, 6th, 8th, anyway, these different corridors being more utilized.
so this one would be adding stop signs? Or is that removing there too?
Removing.
That's removing. And they're not being reorientated, they're just being removed.
Yep.
Okay.
so 6th and not 5th.
Free
and
for all
3rd
right
and
there.
not 4th. That's it.
Third's a lot wider.
Oh,
Fourth will still be used just because it's the straightest
Straight
way to
from-
Costco.
right.
Is there a stop sign right there on 8?
Right here?
I say that because my cut through town from
That's 8.
Canyon
Isn't
Road
that
to
8?
get over to Macy's is drop down
No.
to get to
this is
that,
at
is
6th,
to go
yeah.
5th and then drop down to 3rd.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yep. So there's 3 projects there's the 2 existing roundabouts that are gray. And
Put
then
2 more
your-
roundabouts on there?
What's that?
We'll put 3 more roundabouts on 4th? Make it an even 5.
Yeah, it's gonna be exciting.
Right down by Todd's house.
what did the
Love this
city
one.
pass last night on the 400 North Roundabout?
It
City
was
approved
I think it was to
To put
buy
the-
the house,
Oh,
or
Oh,
What
to
was the last
buy the
name?
house and exchange the house.
Oh, it's to sell it,
To
that's what it
exchange
was.
it with somebody else.
The white brick, the
Gotcha.
Lundell house.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sell the Lydiard house and buy the.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Do you know what these are going to be, Mike?
What's that?
These two, are they going to be just stop signs or on number 13 and 18?
Either a signal or roundabout, probably roundabout.
It's the yellow,
A lot of roundabouts on that road.
the yellow box.
I wish I made this figure so I could have these at the top of my mind, but.
Is that by the Maverick
Signal.
in Texaco?
Yeah.
Because that's a mess.
Black Rifle, yeah, that's this one over here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that one.
This is the one that's
Yeah,
on
that's
the
a
other
mess.
side of Ace. That's Ace right there.
Yeah, this is 8th and 8th.
I so wish that that was a roundabout, the Maverick and Texaco line.
Yeah, 8th
I
and
don't go
6th.
that way anymore because I hate that light so bad.
I like going around it.
But maybe that's the point, to get less people to go there.
Yeah, it was a 5X cost to do the roundabout.
Yeah, I know.
It wasn't cheap.
Okay.
So, Michael, question for you. Since the city's removed all the stop signs and made a nice drag strip through here, what has been the increased traffic, any increased accidents? What's been the results of that?
I need to ask Dylan. I know he's set out multiple speed counters. I know the police have set out a couple as well. The first one that came back said it was, I think it was a 1 mile an hour increase on average. They go out in an unmarked car, like an intern's car, and with a radar gun, and they just do 100 cars. And they've done that a couple times, and it's been pretty marginal.
Jackson, do you do that?
Do they do that at lunchtime at the high school? Or do they
I
do
don't
that
know.
at, like,
Only
10 in the morning?
at night when you're around.
Yeah, Sunday afternoon?
9 p.m.
Is the,
But that's just what he's told me. I don't know the details of when or how he did it.
this is the 600 one? Is there already a light there? Is that where the new light is? in
That's
Canyon?
third.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
this is
third.
600.
This is 600. Is this where there is already a light right now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah, it's a good decent.
I know Dylan spends a fair amount of time on the phone with folks on concerned with Third West and different things. So,
I just gave him your number.
oh,
Yeah.
I don't get very many calls then.
No, they just,
Todd's half the calls.
I do know a fair amount of people who live there.
yes, you do.
So high school's putting these ones in, and then there'll be the interchange, and then this Center Street will be transferred in the near future to UDOT,
Oh, is that right?
and we'll take Canyon Road.
So what about, is there any plans for First South right here? Because this is,
Signal.
that will be eventually a signal?
Yeah, it's on our master plan, not part of this study to look at it, but yeah, that'll be a signal here. And then the idea is that Volunteer can be a higher speed limit. It's a lot wider. It was built in advance. We had control over from the beginning what it was gonna look like. So it'll be a 5-lane facility all the way from the Wendy's down there all the way up to Center. Good? No?
Should I make a motion?
We can skip all the others. I'm good with
Just
that.
asking.
Is there a few? Yeah.
I voice all my public opinions.
few more
I
slides.
guess for the record, I know that this is all designed and set and everything, but my one concern with 600, with the 600 being the thoroughfare is it's right next to the elementary school. This is Park, right?
Yeah.
Is having a lot more traffic right there by the elementary school. I wish it was just over a block and then you had to just jog over if you were intentionally going to the elementary school.
Sure.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So we approached.
But that's better than here, because this is an elementary school and that's a high school.
correct.
So this must be great.
We met with the school, the principal, and Matt Gledhill and a couple others, and
kind of proposed this and talked about right now it was a four-way stop at the entrance for the buses. And we talked about the flashing signs where you push it and it has LEDs on both sides. And we just kind of said, hey, what are your thoughts on doing this? And we, all of us before the meeting, were like, they're not going to like it. They like four-way stops. They don't, you know, and they were very excited about the idea of adding the flashing signs and doing what we ended up doing. Enough, I think Chris in the meeting was like, we didn't expect you to like this. And so far they've been,
Well, when you tell them they don't have a
Happy with it.
choice, right when you start the meeting, it makes them change.
Have we seen, do you see, I don't know, good participation like on the Fourth North by Reese? Do people stop for those flashing signs? That's a pretty busy street right there by Reese Elementary on Fourth North. And they have the flashing crosswalk.
I don't go through there that time for me to visually see it all. I haven't heard
I've
complaints.
stopped there.
I see a lot of people stop there. I just didn't know if there's a correlation. Like,
Do you, so would you do the same kind of thing here by Park?
Yeah, sorry, so to finish, it'd be the same thing. We'd do the flashing signs, take out the stop signs. Not all of them, just two of them, but.
just in one direction.
The idea is if there's a stop sign, everyone says, well, they're supposed to stop, and they, you know, a lot of people just go, and a lot of fatalities are from people running the stop signs because they don't see them or whatever else. So the flashing have had a lot higher people obeying them, following them. They see it visually; it attracts their attention. The stop sign can be kind of a false sense of security.
That makes sense.
So. And then same thing at Larson as well.
Motion, Joseph?
Would love to go through all these,
No, we
but
still have to do public hearing.
Is there still a,
Did.
Commissioner Cardone has to, Chairman Cardone has to say it's public hearing time.
do we have, you don't have any more exhibits to go through?
Are there any other highlights in your other?
this just adds the stuff we just saw up above. So this would be what our master plan would then look like with it. So
That exhibit makes more sense.
when you can see all of it put together.
Give me lights and signals instead of,
Squares?
or signals and
And circles.
roundabouts.
Yeah.
Jetted roundabouts, round curves.
What in the world?
Those are the black signals compared to the yellow signals.
Yeah.
Existing versus proposed. Same with the roundabouts, blue or existing, yellow would be proposed, and it can change to a signal. The roundabout's more of a, it's more expensive, more intrusive type of an improvement. So if it's in question which it should be, we usually just put a roundabout and then we can look at it when it comes time. But if it's a no question signal, we just put the signal. Like this one, UDOT has said it will be a signal, so we're putting a signal.
So adding 3 stoplights on Center Street every 2 to 3 blocks, that's a lot.
I'll have to avoid Center Street.
Similar to Canyon, yeah.
Which is not my favorite either, because of all the like new lights.
Okay. Any questions at this point?
We added a trail.
It looks like the effort is to get people going north to south through town.
Well, our big issue is Main Street's the only one that's north and south
Right.
from bottom to top. So I'm not going to take side streets with 12 yield signs and stop signs to get from A to B. I'm going to Main Street.
Yeah, but you're adding to the east-west, you're adding,
Correct.
You know,
To try and
but everything-
incentivize of,
because all of our pressure is going this way.
yeah, to get more of the north-south movement. Because if I'm on Center Street, pretty much anywhere along here, unless I'm close to 8th, I'm going to Main Street because I don't want to stop 6 times getting up to this spot. Now, the funny part is, at peak times, Main Street's way worse than a couple stop signs.
I always
That
take-
is still where everyone goes.
I always take the back roads.
I always do the back roads too, because you only stop twice. You stop at
Yeah.
400 and 800.
Mm.
Well, Center Street if you're coming over.
But I'm not driving from Salem or,
Yeah, so
Either.
Salem, they come up
Yeah.
here, are they gonna come take this route? Yeah. Yep. So just gives a couple more options that way. The rest of these, just to be honest, are adding or adjusting trails to make them more reasonable. Putting it from the south side to the north side of the road for the interchange because UDOT wanted that adjustment. So we said, okay. This trail went to, a long time ago, was going to go to a park that is now on the north side of that road, or north side of the river, excuse me. So it doesn't make sense to have that anymore, so we took it off. So show stopping, stuff like that. Perfect. But yeah, the main one was just this corridor vision of our master plan having a lingering failure that it didn't last through 2050.
Okay. All right, with that, we'll go into public hearing. Seeing no one, we'll go out of public hearing. Okay, any comments or other concerns? Okay, with that, then we'll someone make a motion.
I already did it twice.
I move that is it recommend to city council?
Yes.
I move that we recommend city council the updates to the transportation master plan.
We got a motion. Any seconds? Second. Any discussions on that? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? I think everyone voted that time. Unless I missed it.
Now even more exciting stuff.
Construction standards.
Ooh.
I'll just perk right up.
Perks up, ready to go. I will go through the bullets. If you want to go more detail, I will gladly talk really short about it, but I'll just go through each one real quick. Excavation permit it has clarification on what fees we charge and what they're for. It's helped us on my side officiating it to be a little more clear and upfront, and helps cover the city a little bit better. Next one, bioretention swells. If you've driven on Spanish Brook Parkway and Legacy Farms, you have those dips from the curb that go down and then back up to the sidewalk. And they're really tough to look good. Most people don't like using them anyway. The city doesn't use them. So we took that out. Next one is a calculation thing for me, is I'm helping consultants design storm drain. Next one is installing those R tanks. So instead of a swell, we filled in the swell and put underground containers of sorts.
Storm techs.
Storm techs, storm bricks, R tanks, and we have learned a thing or two over the years. We've been installing them, and so we added some installation guidance, so they last a lot longer and they're easier to install. Somehow the manufacturer likes to complicate it a little bit, and we've anyway, some stuff to make it a little easier. Next one is to have a way for our inspectors to go in and inspect them and test them, make sure they're working. Next one is adding a section for energizing developments, what things the power department are looking for in order for a subdivision to get the power turned on in the construction phase. Next one, we are DRC recommended that it be removed. It's not ready to go be approved, so it'll be on the next one. So tabling it of sorts. Landscaping section talks about what type of rotor, sprinkler heads, and other similar things the Parks Department wants to have. And I'm not going to pretend to understand all the details of sprinkler heads, but that's that section. Next one helps us develop like Lowe's area where you have a pad out in front and you want to have fire and a fire line and everything ready for it, but you don't know where it's going to go. So rather than just not putting it in and digging up Canyon Creek Parkway when it does come in, we're going to pre-install something that's very flexible that can be used for a lot of different scenarios. So we have a detail that kind of shows that. And that's what is actually in front of Lowe's. We designed this when Lowe's was being put in. Next one, we don't have a 6-inch water service standard, so we added one. And it's on the 4-inch service detail. And then next one adds some part numbers that help the contractors know exactly what to get when they go to the store to get the parts.
And that is it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Any questions? Okay, we'll go into public hearing and out of public hearing. No one is here. Any questions, or else we would entertain a motion.
My comment is, good job, thanks for keeping everything up to date.
We're doing it twice a year, so you don't get these little ones here and there. This is, yeah, so from July till now, and then we'll do another round, and we won't see it again till next May.
Second Sean's comment. Good job.
So,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I'd like to recommend the proposed amendments to the construction standards for approval.
Okay, got a motion?
Second.
Second. And then deleting the one.
Yeah, what was the standard? You said it wasn't ready.
oh, sorry, it's the unacceptable, there you go, unacceptable meter locations.
Okay. So let me amend that. I'd like to make a motion. I move that we recommend the proposed amendments with the exception of the unacceptable meter locations of the construction standards for approval.
Perfect. Okay, we got a motion? A new motion.
Second.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Second.
Okay, discussion items.
Super.
Let's do it.
May I? Zoning map amendments. We had a chance in your work meeting, before this meeting, we talked about some changes that we as staff feel need to be made. We look forward to moving forward in December with a public hearing on the ones that would require a public hearing. So, in order to put that ball in motion, we are looking for you now to make a motion to direct staff to initiate the process to make those changes.
I'm sorry. You go ahead. Yeah? Okay.
We're leaning forward.
I move the city initiates a formal review of our zoning map and potentially make amendments there too.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, motion is second on the zoning map amendments. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Other land use matters.
Boring stuff out of the way. It's been great. We
What's that?
appreciate your patience. Moving on to more exciting things. Brandon, Shauna, Vaughn, and I, Vaughn, right on the spot, we've had a chance to attend a few different trainings recently. Can I take a couple minutes to talk about one particular part of one that I attended?
We're on the edge of our seats.
And then
This is exciting
I
stuff.
think Shauna and Brandon have some things to share as well. Mike, if you can pull up what you had queued up just a second ago. Chuck Mahorn, I think is how you say his name. I think he's the founder and kind of top dog at what's called Strong Towns. He presented, and if you maybe just, you go to any of the, you just go right there, I think we get around this, maybe not. But he spoke at one of the prominent parts of the League of Cities and Towns Conference about a handful of different things, particularly about the importance of getting public streets designed the right way so that they can meet a lot of different use expectations and needs and that sort of a thing. I can't briefly summarize everything that he touched on, other than maybe just to say what I mentioned a minute ago. But I invite you, as you might care to visit this website. I was looking earlier today at articles that he collects and puts on his website that deal with a number of different urban design, urban planning, community kinds of topics. Looked at parking standards, for example, and different approaches that people are taking to regulating parking from what's typically been done, including our approach where it's a simple mathematical calculation based on building square footage. Lots and lots of stuff, and again, if any of you guys ever find yourself, there's a couple of hours every Sunday that I have. It's in the morning now where I hope keep myself awake by going through websites like this. Just whenever your time might be free to peruse
A
different
couple hours you're
things.
sitting on a bench on Sunday morning?
Chairs, yes.
The hard ones in the back?
Taken by people that prefer to be closer than me.
Is this the gentleman that's long been a proponent of certain residential densities and streets to help cover the cost of?
I thought it was that, but no, I was wrong.
That's somebody else?
Yeah, that's a different group. They're out of North Carolina, he's out of Minnesota. His name will come to me in a second, but, this guy was an engineer, Chuck was, and he, basically calls himself a reformed engineer now that takes into account a lot of things that sometimes engineers don't when it comes to just
Common
what makes
sense.
sense to, he would say it, I'm not gonna try to make Mike feel like a lesser person by quoting any of the things that Chuck shared, which he's pretty direct. And we love our engineer friends. But
have
he's
any.
just as direct when it comes to, public safety people and what they say we need to be able to navigate neighborhoods.
What a punk.
All of that. Likewise, we'll leave attorneys out of it tonight. I'll do that, okay? No attorney jabs.
I was ready for that.
But, anyway, that's my invitation. He really, really, made a great presentation. My hope would be that I can track that down. I thought maybe I could, and we could look at a couple of snippets of it tonight. I think the league recorded this, but I couldn't find it earlier today, so it's getting a little bit late. I'll stop. Shauna, I don't know if you want to.
What were the bullet points? What were the takeaways from there? I mean,
Yeah.
when you're talking about making,
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like his idea is to, let's make our streets right the first time, so we don't need to go back and redo them again.
We've done a lot of the things here in recent years that he would suggest communities need to do more often. Less asphalt. If you got an 11-foot wide travel lane, you don't need 40 feet overall of asphalt curb to curb to make a local street work. I can maybe be closer to half that actually. Planning for spaces that are appropriately designed for pedestrians to use along streets and at intersections. Designing streets for people that use them versus just designing local streets maybe like they were highways and that type of a thing. A lot of things that we've made, significant strides towards doing in the last 10 years or so. Talked a little bit about how adjacent land uses should affect how you design streets and the like. A lot of what he talked about really will have meaning for us when Main Street starts to be reconstructed, which I'd hope would have been sooner than this, but I think we've kind of kicked that down the road to where it might not be started until 2024. When UDOT will be rebuilding it incrementally, probably in 3 big projects is my guess, over the course of about a decade. And that will change how that street functions in a lot of different ways. But aside from just what he presented on then, really, it's a good repository just for different perspectives on a lot of things that you get asked to give thought to in one context or another from time to time. So
you should put a Trader Joe's there. One of his
Is that
articles.
interesting? Yeah, it's
I bet you never hear that. Taco John's.
Taco John's, yeah.
Yeah.
That was my favorite place to go growing up. Talking about how maybe sites should be designed differently to be more just attractive and user-friendly and that sort of thing. Touches on a lot of different topics.
Is that one for a quick class?
He says something in here about not having more than 2 car washes.
My hearing's
Car wash quota.
Oh no, we're gonna have too many clean cars in the city. It's a real problem.
Anything else with that?
That's it for today.
Okay.
I've got an email we can pull up for Sean's comments. Do you have the email pulled up?
I can go through it. Oh, yeah.
That's pretty good.
That's
More than mine, Shauna, honestly, Shauna and I talked a little bit, but I don't want to steal any thunder, but
It's fine, I can.
some of the things that she might touch on here, I think we might want to spend more time talking about in a different meeting. So I found this earlier today.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I thought it might
Oh,
relate.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Not to spring that on you, but
Oh, awesome.
I just did.
Okay, so just from this conference, there were a few of these that really stood out to me. So the keynote actually was really interesting. I don't know that it has a lot to do with us, but they talked about the point development. So the prison site, I don't know if you guys knew that this is state-owned land and the state is developing it. And that seems unusual to me, right? It's usually cities that do developments like this.
State created a land use authority to
It's called
develop.
Point Development Authority.
Yeah.
Development authority, yeah.
Anyway, so it's gonna be a mixed
that, Draper.
development. They want it to be a 15-minute city, so you walk anywhere you want to get whatever you need for your life in 15 minutes. It's gonna be connected to the regional river to range trails system, which I didn't know that they had, which is so cool. And there's a place in the middle called the Hub with retail and entertainment, Central Park type area, and they're trying to do it as a development that has a lot of character. Dave did a good job on the panel about TDRs. One thing that I had a question is the Mapleton guy, he just in passing talked about something with their TDRs, and you got more credits if you deeded your land to the city?
Twice as many. So you got TDRs if the property that you own was simply deed restricted, and that number doubled if instead of keeping the property with the deed restriction, you dedicated it to the city. And they had a handful of people that took that option.
And is the city gonna do anything? I guess what they're trying to do is
Preserve the mountains.
Preserving the hillside.
Either way, that's the effort, yeah. I don't know if they have plans for what they own.
interesting. I went on 2 field trips and they were so awesome. One was a bike tour of the Jordan River Parkway area. We rode right along that trail. That was interesting to start in Lehigh and see this healthy river and then go through the Narrows part where the train goes through and watch the water be diverted to all these different places, and all of a sudden it's not much of a river anymore because of everybody's water rights once you get into Salt Lake County. And that is so strange that if you have the water rights, you have to take your water. You can't leave it in the Jordan River because then you lose your rights to the water. So like the biggest user I think is what's the mine that's
Kennecott.
They're one of the biggest users. They have to divert their water, but they don't need all that water. So that could be going and feeding the Great Salt Lake. Anyway, it was fascinating to watch and learn all about that. Then I went to so the guy that did the bike tour, his name was Soren Simonson, and he also did a session about water, and I learned some super interesting things like 90% of the water precipitation that in Utah goes into groundwater aquifers through percolation. So everything, as long as there's not pavement type surfaces, otherwise then it goes into storm drains. But it's way better to have pervious and not impervious surfaces because the water doesn't evaporate so quickly if you have pervious surfaces. So if you're in a place like the Point and they're doing a lot more surfaces that the water can go down into, they have a lot less runoff, and it's a lot less pollution and all of that kind of stuff that's going down into. Anyway, that was a super interesting one. Quickly about bike transportation, they talked a lot about bike lanes, but one thing you might think is interesting is that they talked about making active transportation corridors and trails, and they talked about the difference between commuter corridors for bikes versus recreation corridors for bikes. But they took a survey of the population, and 60% of the population is interested in bikes and bike trails, especially in commuting, but they are concerned, and feel dangerous, right? But 5 to 9% is somewhat confident, and 4%-ish is the highly confident. They called them the Spandex Club or, yeah, something like that.
So that group is the ones that are actually using it now? Is that what they're saying? Or are they still
Yeah.
forecasting that they would?
No, they're the 4% is using it, and then the 5 to 9% uses it hesitantly, but less than the confident 4%. Anyway, I thought that was interesting. The
More people
most-
bike than take transit.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting to think about, yeah. So, I think it, partly because you're in control of your transit, yeah. The most interesting thing that I think has the most to do with Spanish Fork, though, was my tour to, they called it workforce housing, we call it in Spanish Fork affordable housing. And it's a place called Veranda West, I think is what this development is called. And they were a large mixed-use development. So they had one big development that was workforce housing, one that was market rate housing. Then they had some commercial, big box, a hotel, all part of this same big development. And so we went on a tour of the workforce housing, and the gentleman that talked to us the most, there was Adam and Corey, but they talked to us about how the financing works. So there's a federal program, a state program, and different types of tax credits, but they lean a lot on big businesses that are the sponsor. They're the ones that put up the bond and get the tax break.
What was the name of the development?
Is this in Draper?
It
Veranda,
is, yeah.
yeah, Draper.
Okay.
This is the development agreement that we found that has some images that maybe Sean might
Oh, cool.
be helpful. So that's the site there, I guess, by adjacent I-15, it looks like, or no?
No, Bangor Highway.
Yeah, closer to Bend.
Well, that's
I got it.
600 west,
Next.
before we get to the river on the left.
Park West, the Homewood. Yep.
Right.
Were you involved on this one? No, just, that's.
Anyway, so one thing is to live in this workforce housing, you have to be approved and you have to be in a band, right? You've got to have you've got to have a job. You've got to prove that you make a certain amount of money, but you've got to be less than another certain amount. And it's, the AMI of this group says something about 60%. And so the residents at this particular place receive a 30 to 60% discount of the current market rate for when they qualify. And then going through this big, I mean, it was a 5-story, really nice, modern apartment building. And we walked through, and one interesting, they had wrapped parking, which is, it's kind of like a parking garage built on the side of the building. And so when you go, you can go up and around, but you can park on your own floor, and then you're not going up all the stairs or elevator or whatever. The hall, they had like a trash chute and a compactor on each floor, really good security. It was wide halls, so when you're in the halls, you don't feel like you're squished and dark. They had them lit, and they had deodorizers in them, so they smelled good. But some of us went up and down the stairwells to get to where we were going instead of the elevators, and they smelled horrible. So they don't do the deodorizer in the stairwell. But anyway, but then when I was talking to,
I'm a little bit confused. Is this the one that's got the affordable housing in it, or is it this Veranda West that has the affordable?
Veranda West,
Okay.
Is this not it?
is this the one?
That
in
looks like it's
American
adjacent.
Fork?
That looks like it's adjacent to where this is.
It's Veranda. Oh,
It came up.
This Veranda West.
the one. See where it says stacked flats
So
on the
Veranda,
bottom left,
verandaisyourhome.com.
left.
Of the map, right, Shauna?
right top left is what the affordable housing looks like.
This is them.
And it's these. Yeah.
But, so then after all of that, I was talking to either Corey or Adam about it, and they said, in the way the market is right now, they could not build this in a Spanish Fork kind of area, the financing would not work. But they did just build an affordable housing townhome type development just off of the 500, what is that, 500 exit in Fifth West in American Fork, that he said he could build that all day long, like tomorrow in Spanish Fork. I don't know if that's something we want to do in Spanish Fork, but it would be I think it'd be interesting and worth it to go on a field trip to that development and hear what they have to say, just so we know that there's more options for affordable housing. in
I don't have
Spanish.
experience, I'm gonna, do you mind?
Yeah.
To follow up on Shauna's last slide. I haven't worked with the mechanisms that a development group like this uses to subsidize their costs to be able to deliver a unit at less than market rate. I'm interested in learning more about that, not necessarily because I think we're totally ready, even from a market perspective, yet in Spanish Fork, but I think either through state mandates or otherwise, it's coming. So I know Adam Langford, one of the two folks that sounds like were part of the presentation that Shauna went through. I'll bet somehow we could arrange to have some kind of conversation with them. I don't know if you guys would be interested in that. These types of situations really are the only thing that's going to provide for housing that meets what we consider to be affordable today, right? Market forces left to themselves, nothing new is affordable. So if you're interested, we could try to get something on the calendar with them.
So, I'm interested in that. In my world, we'll see similar to this, not the same concept, but we'll see the municipalities, when the developer goes into plat his land, they'll set a requirement, like we're doing a development just down from Aspen. And when they went to create that PUD, they were required that so many of them were affordable.
Yep.
And we see that often in those type of areas, because they need the workforce housing and so you'll have some very affordable units amongst the $2 million condos.
Set asides.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that was really attractive to me is that there's a band, right? You've got to, you can see people that are like teachers and law enforcement and, support staff. Like, you want the people that work in Spanish Fork to be able to live here.
Right.
Anyway, I thought it was fascinating and interesting.
And as the legislature starts putting more and more requirements, right, on what we need to do, it's good that we're ahead of understanding what those look like, so we can lead the charge and not be told what we're going to do.
I think we can structure it at a local level instead of mandated from a state level.
It's our best chance.
Yep.
Keep local control is to
Yeah.
do some things.
Do ourselves.
Do it ourselves. Well said, yeah. I like that much. I appreciate that. We'll reach out and see what we can put together.
Yeah, it's great. Thanks for sharing that, Shauna. That was good.
I like it.
Good.
Brandon and Vaughn, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, where's your guys' notes? You guys were there with her. Where are these notes like she has?
They're probably sleeping.
First, I'd like to point out that this great organization is led by none other than Judy Cal. Anybody know Judy? Judy?
I met her. She was a really cool lady.
She is cool.
She is cool.
That was the
It's okay if I sit here? Okay. I prepared a few notes, but Shauna covered most of them, so I'll keep it brief, especially for those that just got off the plane. Try not to talk too much.
I'm doing well. I still got another Coke.
So they fall asleep.
What, do I look tired?
Him too.
So Utah APA is a great one, great opportunity to see different parts of the state, get your education training, hear about projects like this, rub shoulders with other commissioners, planners, hear about projects, solutions, things like that. Utah APA is one.
League of Cities and Towns, we have Utah Land Use Institute. Dave touched on Congress for New Urbanism. Strong Towns is a frequent flyer at that organization. I'm sure there's others that I've missed. But one thing that I thought was interesting about the point was the whole plan was based off of being sustainable. And I like the idea that they have the hub as the central framework of this development. They do have multiple scenarios when they first started looking at layouts. And so if you go to the Kempsey Gardner Institute, you can see some of those build-out scenarios. Skipping ahead.
What was that name, Brandon?
Kempsey Gardner Institute.
Gardner.utah.edu.
Another one that I went to was interesting. It was on ethics, but they were focusing mostly on public hearings. And the things that I wrote down that I thought were interesting for consideration, they're not things that we have to implement. But this gentleman noted that throughout the state, there are more and more contentious public hearings taking place. And he thought that it would be a good idea to consider anytime you have the public hearing to deliberate upon the comments that you hear. And you don't necessarily have to take action that meeting. You can say, you know what, this is a lot of good feedback. This is a quality project. We want to get it right. Obviously, there were people in the audience that were murmuring, saying, you know, no. Let's just, you've had the night, you've heard the comments, make your decision, move on. Time is money kind of sentiment. Another conference topic that was hit on quite heavily in a few different forums was water conservation and just efforts that the state, I just sent Dave a link to a program that's kicking off across the state where you can get $1 per square foot of lawn that you remove from your property, and the legislature funded it to a certain amount. They're really looking at efficient and sustainable use of the water. We do have an effort from the Conservancy District for jurisdictions to adopt some standards that they feel would be great in being efficient with their water use. And then I think we've touched on in the past, we currently have a consultant that's looking at updating our landscaping standards similar to those goals. I'll end with about two. So one that was kind of entertaining, and when you go to these conferences, they have such a huge variety that you can choose from. Every once in a while, you just pick something that's interesting. It might not be applicable to your jurisdiction or the community you work in or live in. One that I went to that was very interesting was a discussion on transit and TODs. And part of the meeting was a discussion on a study that UTA did on 400 South in Salt Lake City. So prior to tracks opening up, they had an estimated 41,000 and change cars a day. They opened tracks that plummeted to 22,000 a day. And then between 2004 to 2018, when they started the study, the vehicle count slowly crept up, but at the same time, they saw a decrease in tracks ridership by 8%. And one of the reasons that the study found was more people were walking and biking instead of taking transit. But then the other thing, the biggest culprit they saw was the district became so trendy because they had so many luxury apartments being built on the street, and most of them provided on-site parking. And so the people that were renting these luxury apartments had the means to not be dependent upon the public transit. And so UTA was pulling their hair out saying, we've just, been investing all this money in this tracks line, and why is our ridership going down? So it was very interesting to hear. The study was conducted with the University of Utah. And it was just interesting to hear, similar to what we heard at the train.
So they decided to spend less money in the future on projects like that? Is that Is that what they did? They like
No,
were reasonable
it's
about
a
their
land
findings?
use correlation.
They used
It's
the data to realize maybe they're taxing people a little more than they need to, and they're spending more money.
They actually talked about exactly what we talked about at the training.
Oh,
which
they
was
want us
maybe
like
if we
force cities to
increase-
zone it so that we change our behavior. Okay,
Exactly.
okay, cool, all right, cool. Sounds good.
Exactly.
Social engineering, Joseph. Come on.
Mhm.
There you go.
Secretly, that's what we're all about.
Secretly.
Not so
And it's
secretly
not very-
anymore.
These
I mean,
studies,
Here's what you can do.
these studies are pretty thorough and in-depth. One of the resources they used was a 2004 TOD report, which was over 500 pages long, just where they went around the nation, looked at all the successful TODs, and then broke it down to common themes. And I admit I didn't read that one. The last one.
Another,
What's that?
Dr. Emmy,
Transit-oriented development.
the University of Utah, who was the guy that ended that one up?
I think it was Reed Ewing.
Ewing, that's right.
The last
Super
one.
thorough guy. I mean, this like, if you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of what does and doesn't work, they have put as much effort into trying to make the decision-making objective and to take guessing out of it as probably anybody has done in the country. And I think that is a fascinating example of a couple of different things. If people can afford to have the transit option, they're gonna, make lifestyle decisions that aren't different from, the rest of the people in Western United States. But if people have their options limited, maybe because of a financial situation or something like that, they're the ones that will take advantage of transit for obvious reasons. I can go on. I want to be boring, please. Sorry.
No. Last but not least, housing was discussed in many of the talks. One that I thought was interesting, and this just is not new information, it's just tried and true data. This was another study that was done by the Kempsey Gardner Institute. This was on housing, but it was specific to Cache County. And they kind of shared their findings, and then they also shared, I didn't print it off, but they have an executive summary that includes, here's action that needs to be taken on the federal level, the state level, the county level, and the municipality level, as far as housing issues for Cache County. And what was interesting is, and this is no surprise, when they started their study, they found that the demand was, number one, created by internal growth. Number two, it was related to increased jobs and businesses in the Cache County area. And then number three, and this was entertaining because one of the gentlemen speaking, he's the county administrator now, but I think before that he was a city manager at one of the cities. And the biggest issue for the housing demand was the local regulations limit on variety of housing types. There was no balance. And he gave some examples from his previous jurisdiction where they had projects that came forward that were shot down because they had townhomes or they had something other than quarter-acre lots. And so their findings, and these are not earth-shattering, and some of these tie to what Shauna learned about in her visit. Number one is cities should look at zoning reform. I think Spanish Fork does a great job of that already. Number two is public education. And I know with our general plan update, we're anticipating, once again, there'll be some public involvement, and there will definitely be an opportunity for education. The third one was interesting, and I think it's dependent on which county you live in Utah, is coordination of growth between the county and the city. And their idea there is if we don't resolve it, then the state will. And that was a theme that we kind of heard hinted at in a few different sessions where if this can't be resolved on the local level, then the state will somehow resolve it. And some of the issues that, or some of the solutions that we've heard are, taking a certain percentage of funding from the cities, and then the county, or then the state would disperse it to a regional authority who would then say, okay, regionally, where does it make most sense to put higher density, and they would take away that local zoning decision. The last one was, or the last two were designate open space, and the idea there was there's a certain quality of life in Cache County that they wanted to maintain, and so if we take the proactive steps of designating those open spaces now, then it'll be beneficial in the future, but the obvious cost there, or the obvious issue there is the cost. And then last but not least, was the inclusionary housing and considering deed-restricted housing, similar to what Sean was talking about as far as reserving a certain number of units in each project that would be available for qualifying individuals.
She voted against that. Didn't she just vote against that?
No?
Deed restricting to owner occupied? Anyway, go ahead, Meredith, sorry.
That's it. And so,
I think Cache County is an interesting, I think in our public, there's a lot of sentiment for Spanish Fork to be like that. I think Logan in that area, especially when you go down into the southern part of that valley, to be more like what a lot of residents want Spanish Fork to remain. And I think that's an interesting comparison to draw with what we deal with here, because we're kind of trending in a, they are where we were, and we're trending away from that.
yeah.
So it's interesting to look at.
I shared the same thought. There were a lot of comparisons.
I mean, they do have a major university there that
Yeah.
when people go there, they want to stay there.
Dave
So,
will chuckle at this, but one common theme that they heard when they started doing their outreach for the study was Logan has the university, all the density should be in Logan. And so in our valley, that's pro bono. You know, that's kind of the sentiment that a lot of people have.
When the state says you do it or we'll do it, has anyone kind of thought through, I'm thinking through it now, so I'm going to say it out loud, think through it out loud. Has anyone thought through whether or not the state constitution allows them to take from each and every city in the state of Utah the right to define and legislate their own zoning? Or would there have to be a constitutional amendment to the state constitution to allow that, which hopefully historically we're in favor of local government having more control, because that's historically much better.
is that what they're doing? Are they withholding and reallocating state money to incentivize?
That's what I heard.
Big.
That's what I heard, and I'm just wondering if it's as simple as them changing their scope of work, or is there something that protects the city's right for land use and zoning in the state constitution? Because I hope we would challenge them.
Deal in the rural state where we have the authority granted to us by the state legislature.
That's how the legislature is.
Yes, sure.
Got it.
There's been some limitation on that. There's some case law I need to reread to not really prepare to speak about that.
I can't remember.
But I think
what-
that's how the legislature views it for sure.
And even going back, so I remember in 2006, there was a bill that was run,
SB 60, right, that's
that failed, but it would have taken zoning power away from cities.
Yes.
And that concept still comes up.
Still,
It is
yeah.
certainly coming up in this session. We're already getting word that that's the case. I feel like that's, honestly, not trying to get political, but, like Russia's saying, well, we might just nuke Ukraine. I kind of feel like that's sort of what it's like, that they remind everybody that, hey, if you don't do what we want to do, then we might just do this. So more of a threat than anything else. But it keeps coming up.
I'm trying to assess
Every
the
year.
credibility of the threat.
So one of our representatives, Stephen White, is on that committee.
A new committee.
Yeah.
And we think it's a committee that's going to have a lot of input, which is amazing. Junior
Right.
representative, it's called the Committee for Attainable Housing. Interesting.
Yeah, so it'd be good to have conversations with him.
We met with him last week.
Oh,
and
did
our
you?
Other representatives, and he was great. We shared some numbers with him in terms of what's happened in Spanish Fork with growth, and you guys might have found them interesting, but like of what's been approved this year, 74% of it is attached housing. We've already issued more building permits in 2022 than we did in 2021. And 2021 was a huge year. That was through the 1st of October, so through the first 3 quarters. We made the case as we were talking to him that, hey, we're doing our part to approve housing use. We have approximately 4,000 lots or units that are in the development pipeline today. That's a community with 11,000 homes altogether. And incidentally, on the Wasatch Front today, depending on where you look, Kimsey Gardner Institute or other sources, you might have a 30,000 home deficiency, might be a 45,000 home deficiency. But to think about that, Spanish Fork, we have 4,000 homes in the pipeline just here. We know other communities, Provo said, they've issued permits for 4,000 homes just this past year. So the point we try to make with him and his colleagues is that we as cities, we not only are doing our part, but we've done our part now. It's going to take a while for actually those homes to get constructed, right? And that's somewhat out of our control. Execution on the part of the development community. All the while, we're trying to make the case that the system is set up to work, but the legislature would be well served. Give it a break for a year or two. You know, let the things that they've done, like the changes that they made to what we have to do for moderate income housing, reporting on that just last year. They've tweaked it every year as if it's something that gets fixed over a 12-month period of time. It doesn't. It's going to take some years. But we really appreciate it, Shauna. And if you get a chance to mention this, I'd appreciate it as well. He couldn't have been more attentive, understanding, helpful. We've got some really good representatives now.
How does the state look like, when you're saying we have 4,000 building permits, like Orem, they're built out. They don't have that number.
They have some number.
Yeah, but it can't be that, because they just don't have the geography to do it anymore.
So Provo's similar.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some greenfield sites in Provo. But Provo's redeveloped.
Yeah.
That's probably the majority, I would guess, of
Infill and redevelopment.
4,000 that they're talking about. Orem has had really big plans to do the same thing. But if you followed Orem politically for the last year, Orem City disbanded their planning commission, at least let all of their planning commissioners go about a year ago, reappointed everybody because the city council didn't like where things had gone from a density perspective. But the plan was to make State Street as a corridor at particular intersections much different, much more dense, certainly adding dwelling units to Orem.
And the city council was against those node zones. Orem called them node zones. I was against them at the
Current
time.
city council, the previous council, obviously.
If they would have allowed car washes, maybe they could have gotten somewhere.
Well, they would have had my support. Yeah.
One other thing I wanted to touch on was maybe late, but we really, and I mean this, we've had joint planning commission and city council meetings over the years. We haven't had that many recently, and we have never had one time I've been here where there has been as much just open and active dialogue as you guys had with them. We learn as staff when it's that way, and I think it's entirely a credit to both you and them. There was disagreement, and nobody seemed to pull back because of that. I mean, the feeling somebody was stepping on my toes or anything.
Why are you pointing to where Joseph was sitting?
Joseph was right in the heat of it, right? That's to be expected. But, he gave
Maybe
it a go,
initiated half of it, but
I don't know if there are any things that you want or expect us specifically to follow up on from that, other than the high-level things that we talked about already. I will say this. The city manager had a conversation with the city council last night, and he got some very explicit direction to make sure that that happens twice a year. Council really appreciated that as well. They want that to happen more regularly, therefore it will. And together any specific things that you might remember to focus on the development group that presented. I had a really candid conversation with them after the meeting and shared the concerns that I heard that came from a lot of different people, a lot of different perspectives, and they took them graciously, and they're working on some type of a second effort there.
Could you let them know that any motion for approval is going to include pavers for every
Yeah, cobblestone roads.
paved in pavers, no asphalt, pavers.
I just think it's interesting, you look at this point,
I'm
I've
just
been
curious.
scanning
Sorry, Dave.
this point project, looking at it, really similar. Look how it out and illustrated compared to the fantasy that we were shown.
The cobblestone roads.
That's good feedback.
Really, I mean, it's a bigger area, but it's got a lot of the same concepts, and it shows realistically.
Is that the point?
You don't have to tell them what I said. Maybe what Todd
We
said.
didn't
Don't tell them what I
mention
said.
that specifically, but the concept was conveyed, for sure.
But it is a pervious surface.
Can be.
Sure.
I think that's a great
Well,
idea to have
depending
those
on what they
more
put
frequent.
underneath it.
At least twice a year.
Because,
Place.
like you just touched on with with Orem, it helps us be in touch with the ideas, what the priorities of the council are, because everything we do is a recommendation to them. Why throw something up that they're not going to want to do?
I think it's very healthy for you guys to be an autonomous body, though.
Well, we're not.
Give them your thoughts.
I don't think
regardless.
anybody on this commission is going to be, okay, well, let's not say what we want. Well, and we're still going to speak our mind. Well,
But I think we mentioned it several
Joseph might
times,
not, but-
right? Is that we feel like we are there to vet things before it goes to the city council and try to do some of that heavy lifting, and I think we take that seriously.
I think you can all appreciate, and maybe I'm slow sometimes, the council's got so many different things going on, but still, most of what they have going on is somehow tied to growth and change that comes from growth and stuff that you were involved in one way or another. So I think that's partly why they value that.
I especially like the conversation because, I mean, you've already said, but everybody said exactly, and nobody worried about being polished or had to be. Anyway, it wasn't a polished conversation, it was a real conversation.
Well, that's it. We touched on everything.
Are we adjourning?
Yeah.
We need a
We
motion.
need a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
Motion.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Nay.
Aye.
Aye.